We can look at people like President Nixon. You remember President Nixon. President Nixon was up here, super traditionalist. He was showing us how he felt about his position when he would go, I am the president, I am the president. Well, when Nixon started getting in trouble with Watergate, a lot of these people said, well, he's the president. He must know more than we know. These people were going, pfft. They didn't go along with him just because he had the title, just because he occupied the office, just because he had been breathing long enough. So the rejectionists do not accept authority figures simply because they have the title, occupy the position. Rejectionists operate very differently in educational systems. Now, when traditionalists and in-betweeners were students, they would go into a classroom, they would be given assignments, they would all go out, do the assignment, turn it in at the same time, or flunk the course. When the rejectionists came on campuses, we would give them an assignment, and they'd say, we don't like it. And we'd say, what the hell do you mean you don't like it? I'm the professor, you're the student, get out and do the assignment. They'd say, let's discuss it. They want to participate. They demand to participate in any decision that affects them. They've always participated. They participate at home, they participate in school, they participate on the playground. They've always participated in decisions that affect them, so consequently now as adults, they want to participate on the job, especially in decisions that affect them. Now obviously differences in values lead to conflicts within our society. And a favorite story of mine that shows the conflict between these values was in Scottsdale, Arizona. In the early 1970s, they opened a brand new community college from scratch. Boom, instant campus. All these people loved it, the Chamber of Commerce, the traditional administrators that they hired. And they looked at those students and they said, okay, you want to participate? You want to help run this school? You help run it. You vote on the school colors and the mascot. These people said, we don't give a damn about the school colors and the mascot. These people said, by God, you get out there and vote right now. So they voted. They voted in pink and white for the colors, and for the mascot, they wanted an artichoke. Pacemakers short-circuited up here. I mean, to these people, those school colors and the mascot are important. You know that's true. You can see them every fall. They come back on college campuses wearing their beanies with the propeller, little sweaters running around. These students could hardly find the stadium, much less worry about school colors and the mascot. Now, that's kind of a silly little story, but not really, because what it should tell us is that what's important to us, what's not important to us, what we believe in, what we don't believe in, what's right, wrong, good, bad, normal, not normal, all those things are directly rooted in our gut-level values. And the values are very, very different across our total society. Group team authority versus individual participation. Another value that's strongly held by the traditionalists is that they believe in institutional leadership. The leadership of our major institution. If a corporation, if a government, if a law, if an educational institution, a church, if they said, do this, then these people would simply accept it and go along. You know, that was sort of summed up very beautifully in what was actually a misquote in the early 1950s when people said, what's good for General Motors is good for the USA. See that? What's good for this is good for everyone. Now, obviously, rejectionists do not simply blindly accept the leadership of our institution. They know, for example, that a number of our institutions can create real problems, havoc within the system. Unless the utility people really know what they're doing with atomic power, we're going to have some problems. Unless the genetic engineers really pay attention, we're going to have some strange mutations wandering around. Pollution, a whole series of problems are developing that are related to the institutions and what they would like to do, but that are being seriously questioned by these younger people. To question is a major value. And one of the favorite questions of these people is why? Why do we do this? Why have we done it? Why should we continue to do it? Unfortunately, when that very basic question of why is asked, a lot of these people simply sputter, because that's the way we've always done it, that's the way we're going to continue to do it, and you just shut up and go up and see. But these people do not go along with inadequate answers. We need to be able to provide effective answers, or else perhaps we should seriously consider changing the way we do things. Institutional leadership versus a very intense questioning major aspects of our society. Another important value from the traditionalist point of view is that of social order. They believe in people in their places because that's very predictable and very comfortable. Now, social order is related to people in their places like the backs of buses, or not going to school with my children, or not living in my neighborhood, or not on the job telling me what to do as the boss. That's bias, prejudice, discrimination. It's related to all sorts of arbitrary distinctions that are made about people based upon sex, race, sexual preference, a whole series of things that simply really are not related to the ability of people to perform. In contrast, the in-betweeners and the rejectionists do not really artificially discriminate against other people. They accept people generally on an equality basis if those people can do one thing, and that thing is perform. Do those people know what the hell they're doing? Can they make a decision effectively in the environment they find themselves in? If they can perform, then they are accepted. They are not discriminated against, as the traditionalists continue to do, even though laws have changed, and even though we give a tremendous amount of lip service to accepting other people on an equality basis. I think this is a very positive value shift that is occurring in our society, and I think a lot of people need to be willing to stand up and make statements about accepting other people and not go along simply with the way things have been in the past, not rocking the boat, shaking the cages, whatever, simply because they don't want to become involved. More people need to become involved in pushing for equality, accepting people if they can perform, make decisions, not what they happen to look like in terms of color, sex, whatever. Social order versus equality. Another value that's strongly held by the traditionalists is that they tend to be a little puritanical. They are Puritan. Now, that is not to say that they did not have fun. They just didn't talk about it a lot. In fact, they were really good at being two-faced, double-standard about the whole thing. Rejectionists are not puritanical at all. In fact, rejectionists are very open, very, very much alive in the sense of relating to the rest of the world. They are sensual. They like to feel one another and anyone else that might be around. This is the first generation that massively used drugs to amplify their sensory experiences. They wanted to get turned on, and they still get turned on. On the other hand, the traditionalists, they don't want to get too excited. They get a little upset stomach, have to take a Pepto-Bismol, Alka-Seltzer. They're just not too involved. They'd rather pull back, be spectators rather than participators, as the rejectionists are. Now, quite frequently, when I'm doing a live presentation of this program, when I put Puritan and sensual up, if I watch out of the corner of my eye, I can frequently see a traditionalist in the audience who will say, "Oh, God, he's going to talk about sex." And I am. But I'm going to handle it very carefully, so if you're over here, you won't get upset. The one area of sex I know something about from a purely professional point of view is pornography. The reason, in 1969, 1970, I was hired by what was called the President's Commission on Obscenity and Pornography to do market research. Now, basically, that report, if you remember, was rejected when it was turned in by the traditionalists, President Nixon, Vice President Agnew, and such illustrious members of Congress as Hayes and Mills categorically rejected that report. Obviously, they didn't want to be confused by any factual information. Now, in doing the report, my primary concern was what goes on in the marketplace. Who buys the materials? And so, in the process of doing research, I watched thousands and thousands of people across this system in the porno shops. We'd go in, stand around, act like we were taking an inventory, but what we were really doing is looking at the customers and taking down 22 pieces of information: age, how they were dressed, whether they were using their master charts, whatever. A lot of people look very familiar still from those studies. But anyway, what we found out in terms of pornography was that traditionalists have had it but hid it. Up in the attic, out in the garage, down in the basement. Rejectionists found it and did it. And in-betweeners missed it and bought stacks of it. The primary purchasers of so-called pornographic obscene material for the past decade in this country have been this group right here. The way we work, the way we play, the way we purchase products, the way we raise our children, the way we do everything is rooted in our gut-level value system. And those values are very, very different. Now, another example on the Puritan sensual involving language. People obviously react to language. You know, in this presentation, I've used a few four-letter words. Not any of the really big ones that cause people to faint and throw up and leave the room, but just a few. That's the language of today. It's the wording that we see in the movies. It's what we read in the newspapers, the magazines, what we hear on the nightly news. To use those words is to use the language of today. And if you want to communicate, especially with people back here, whether you personally like that language or not, you can use it to communicate with these people. Now, in the process of originally filming What You Are Is Where You Were When, the first of this series of programs, in 1975, when that movie was released, a major purchaser was a U.S. chemical corporation. They wanted to use the program in their affirmative action series to kind of needle a lot of people. They were sort of going to sleep. They weren't paying any attention. So they hoped that the program would kind of jolt them. Well, that program also had some of the four-letter words sprinkled through it. Well, obviously, to use the program in a big corporation, you have to get vice presidential approval. So they take the film What You Are Is Where You Were When to the 57-year-old vice president who lives on the 12th floor of their corporate headquarters in a very rarefied atmosphere. And they show him the film, and he said, absolutely not. That is total filth. We do not talk like that in this company. Now, obviously, he had not been beneath the 11th floor recently because they do talk like that. But anyway, he then said, the women will be completely turned off. They'll just get up and walk out. Our women will not stand for that. Well, the people who bought the film really did want to use it, so they went out, gathered a bunch of employees, showed them the film, and asked them a series of questions. One of the questions said something like, it has been suggested we should not use this material because of the language. It will be offensive, especially to women. What is your reaction to that? 80% of the women wrote bullshit. And armed with that data, he gave in. But they had to prove it to him. They had to show him the reality of the world and its people. In that guy's value system, women were still sitting around on the veranda drinking mint juleps waiting for the gentleman callers. He didn't realize the world had changed, people had changed, women had changed, and he was still using his value system to relate to the world. That's a major way